right, guys. Hi. Welcome back to the Book Haven with Rachel and Raven. We're so glad you're here. I'm Raven, and this is Rachel. We haven't figured out which screen, so one of these is Rachel. And we're so glad you're here today. We are going to talk about just like some self-help books, which I actually kind of think is an oxymoron. But we have a really good one that we want to discuss called Bad Therapy. So I read this one early part of March, I think, and then you just finished it. Well,
yes,
I guess
at the end of
a week
March,
or two ago.
Yeah.
So what were some of your takeaways, Rachel?
So this book talks about therapy and therapy practices with youth. She starts out the book and has the caveat of like, yes, there are people that need therapy. There are people that struggle with mental illness. There are all of these things, and all of these things are valid. Her point that she makes throughout like the book, though, is that, and it's more really, I think, of a question of, are we over therapying, if I can make it a verb, our kids nowadays. So, and I think this book really resonated with both of us. Full disclosure, both of us have had therapy at different points in our lives. I have been on anxiety medication and stuff like that. So it's definitely stuff that I've wrestled with personally. So you read this book first and you were kind of like, I'm not sure if I agree with everything she said. So I kind of went into it with that kind of notion. But I feel like I resonated a lot with what she was saying as far as I do think that I am probably one of those kids that got my mom wanted to do the best for me. She's being told that therapy is a good option. Anxiety medicine is a good option. We're talking about early 2000s. And so I walked that path. And I really resonated with everything she was saying in the book about the side effects of doing that and how and I didn't feel like she was blaming the parents at all. Because like I said, my mom was she was a single mom. She's trying to do her best. But and she's being told from every way that this is the way to help. And so she really, I think Abigail Shrier, really, the author, really kind of pushes the idea of like, who's telling parents this? Why do parents feel like this is the only option? And is this the best protocol? Are there ulterior motives from people that are pushing this protocol? Like that kind of stuff. So that's what the basis of the book is about. So those are kind of so I have already recommended this book to people. I do think it is super challenging. It will make you think, it will make you pause. Sometimes it can come across a little maybe brash, but I think sometimes books like that make us super uncomfortable are books that are good to read and challenge us. So I would not shy away from recommending this book, even if I know that it's going to maybe challenge you. I think it's really, really good in all of the points. Do I necessarily agree with every single thing she said? No. Would I be able to point out every little thing? No. And you and I have already kind of talked about this briefly, aside from this podcast, of sometimes I think in the book we forget the thing that she states at the beginning, as far as saying, like, but I know that there are real cases. And she does kind of say it throughout the book. But at a certain point, you kind of think, does she just not believe in therapy at all? But that's not what she says. And so I think if you keep that in mind as you're reading the book, because it gets really uncomfortable. And I think it's because I would imagine that every single person in America today has been touched by the therapy strategies that are pushed so heavily in our country today. Does that make sense? So that's where I kind of fell. So what were your thoughts?
I would say along with what you just said is that also we are living in 2024. We are the most advanced. We have all of this therapy I think the question that arose from that book for me that was like a takeaway is, with all of these things that we have at our fingertips, why are we getting worse and not
Yeah.
better?
Yeah.
And so I think when you think about that, I mean, it all really, a lot of times, I think there are some therapists out there that do genuinely care, and they probably are practicing not like what I'm fixing to say. But I think ultimately it all goes back to money. These are people's
Hmm.
jobs, their livelihoods. And she brings up those issues in that book. My takeaway from it was that, and then also just the generations before us, and how resilient they were.
Hmm.
And I probably was, I was one of those children that at a young, very young age, I should have had some help. um, I should have been given some help to be processed. And I'm not saying that out of like a bitter place in my heart or whatever, but I feel like
Yeah.
I would have fallen under one of those. I would have fallen under that. Um, but I didn't get any. And, for the most part, I was fine. I would say, and this isn't like a braggy thing, but like I am a pretty resilient person. I've been through some things and I've overcome them. Um, but I did get into therapy when I was, let me think here. I don't know, 8, 10-ish years ago, I guess. And it did help. But the problem was, and the first person that I was with, is she wanted me to stay in this, it felt like a victim mentality. And I wasn't okay with that anymore. I got to a point where I was like, no, like I'm moving on. Like
Hmm.
I'm not, this isn't like going to be a lifetime thing for me. So that's kind of
Well,
my background.
yeah. Well, I was gonna say, so she talks about that in the book about how this this revolving door of always needing therapy. And a
Mhm.
lot of these therapists, like, there's never an end date when you go and get
Yeah.
set up. Like, it's just kind of the standing appointment that you just have forever. And she talks about, which I thought was a really good point, of how going and talking about your problems every week, is that really helping you move on, or is that making you sit in your problems that maybe you had already moved on from? But now we're going to bring it back up and talk about it with somebody so that we can get like help to process maybe what we had already processed on our own. And so I
Yeah.
thought that was a really good point. And so she makes a lot of good points like that, of just kind of asking the question, like, so what is the end goal? And she tells a story for herself of, like, she goes and gets a therapist when she graduates college and moves and whatever. And she was like, basically, I was paying for a best friend to have somebody
Right.
to go talk to about what was going on in my life. And she had to sit there and listen to me for an hour, kind of like y'all have to listen
And
to us on here. but but this is our therapy. But she also brought up the point too, and I have, this really resonated with me as well, the point about how when I have to bring up something or rethink about something that happened to me that hurt or that bothered me or whatever, of course it is going to bring me back into that feeling. And so she was saying how she talked to people who said that they would be fine, like having an okay day when they went into therapy, and they left therapy feeling bad because I had to bring up all of this stuff again. So I thought that was a good point too.
yeah. Yeah, and I think a lot of times, in my experience, there were times just like that. Like I would go in and I was fine and like things were great, but they had a different agenda, and it took me back to a place. And I think towards the end of my time of going, that's kind of what I was feeling, is like I don't really want to live in that headspace anymore. I'm ready to move on, like, and live a life. This
Yeah.
isn't life. This is just me sitting and ruminating and in the hurt and the pain and the whatever. Um, and I think there are healing aspects to those, to talking, to like talk therapy and stuff like that, but not when it's just you're just sitting in it all of the time, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think there's something really to be said, even like if you, she brings up in the book as well of like the, the greatest generation and how, a lot of those men that came back from those wars, Vietnam and all of those things. Now, there were some obviously that turned to substances and addictions and things like that that were not healthy. But the resilient ones, the ones that came back that were like they just picked up their life and they moved on. And a lot of them, their families didn't even know all that they had been through. And I think of a lot of like even the Holocaust survivors when they
Mm-hmm.
came back and they just got to work. They started providing for their family and building a family and all of those things. Those are the people that you would definitely think needed a lot more therapy. But when we look back on those people, those are very seemingly healthy, thriving human beings to society. Does that
Who
make sense?
actually went through like atrocities,
Yeah.
not, yes, not that,
N- Not I got my
these
feelings
little
hurt
things.
kind of a
Yes,
thing.
yes.
And I'm not saying that those little things don't hurt or
Yeah,
things that are lesser than that kind of suffering don't hurt. But my goodness, let's move on. Let's not ruminate about that for years and years and years and years to come.
yeah.
And I know that's
And
a spicy take, but
yeah. But I feel like this book is a spicy take, but it is so
it is.
thought-provoking as far as like you said in the beginning. Why is it that we have all
Mhm.
of these things, and we're so advanced, and yet our society is not doing well? I mean, it doesn't matter
Right.
what side of the aisle you're on, like the statistics and facts are there. There are more kids that are struggling with mental illness. And no matter how you feel about it, like those are the facts. And so why is that? Why? And so I thought she did a good job. I don't feel like this book is political in any way, like taking a side one
No.
way or the other.
Other thing that I really liked is that she talked about how, um, like, people taking on the identity of whatever it is their
Yes.
mental illness is. And so, even parents, I just listened to a podcast that she was on. She was just talking about this, about how um, parents will introduce their kids as whatever label. I'm not going to go there and like spit some stuff out here, but they
Yeah.
introduce their kid as this is my blank child, whatever their mental illness
Yeah.
is. And when did that start? Like, when did we
Yeah.
start like identifying our kids by what their struggles are? They
Yeah.
may really have a legitimate struggle, but why are we placing that label on them? And I've heard people do that all of the time. So that's not
Hmm.
like just this far-fetched thing like one person did it one time. I hear it a lot. This is
Yeah.
my whatever child, and I just yeah, I really appreciate that she brought that out in the book um about how damaging that is now,
Yeah.
you know.
Well, and so a takeaway that I have been wrestling with and mulling over since I finished reading it was this, because I know I do this. So she talks in the book about how when you have certain fears and anxieties, that you are then not doing it on purpose, obviously, but you are
Yeah.
putting those on your kids. So, like I said, anxiety is definitely stuff that I have struggled with. Now, reading all the things that we've been reading and this book in general and stuff, like anxiety is not meant to be a bad thing. Like you have those to keep you, like you have that feeling to keep you safe, to
Yeah.
keep you, like evaluating your life choices. It doesn't mean that those are bad things. And honestly, growing from going on medication and being on therapy, and I got off of it, and I really had to train myself how to work through those feelings, that come up and feel
Yeah.
debilitating. Me as a mom then putting this on my kids. So I have a fear of them getting kidnapped. So I am like, which all moms do, but I can be very, very
Right.
protective. Like, no, I don't want you to go outside by yourself. I don't want you to do all these things that past generations did do. Do we live in a crazier time? I don't know. Do we just know more of the information of the crazy people? I don't know. But taking that aside, I mean, I think you want to be realistic. Like, I'm still going to keep my kids safe. But I have really controlled that a lot in their lives of whether or not I'm going to let them do certain things or go certain places without me, because I have this fear and I'm living with this fear. And we could even make that biblical and just say, like, that's not a biblical thing either. And I know, and I'm working on
Yeah.
it, but I can see how over time I have done this to my kids. So for the first time this week, I let my oldest one drive to the next town over, run around and have fun with his girlfriend. And was I a nervous wreck? Yes. But I just kept telling myself, I can't keep holding him back. Like, I have got to just deal with whatever consequences are going to happen, because there are going to be consequences from me smothering him as
Right.
well. And so
Yeah.
that was a big takeaway that I got from that, of like, how can I not push my kids out? And like I said, like, there's still boundaries and stuff like that. But at what point, I think I really, really have to wrestle with, what am I, like, trying to control, I
Projecting.
guess. Yes,
Oh, yeah.
projecting and
Yeah.
all that stuff. So that was a big takeaway for me in my own life.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a
So,
big one.
yeah.
I
So
think she also talks in there about how to let them fail within
yes.
the, like letting them fail, letting them experience that. And I think definitely in our culture today, there's such a fear of, and I don't know where that comes from. I don't know, like,
Yeah.
where did the pendulum swing so far? Because I think back, even when I was a kid, just some of the things that we did, and I don't know, like, it was just normal. But even further back than that, you know, they just ran amok. I'm not encouraging that, but
Right, right. But
I'm just
that's
saying.
typical behavior. And I think her point to that was that because we are setting these fence posts so far back of like, I don't want you to get hurt. I don't want anything bad to happen to you. I don't
Yeah,
want any of this. Our kids are not developing and getting that sense of, ownership and an adultness. And it definitely ties into how many kids are in their 20s and cannot adult. Like,
yeah,
I see people nowadays that are, you know, in their 20s, and I'm thinking, by 21 I had, which I'm not advocating like whatever, but by 21 I was married and had a kid. And so there's this different kind of, I don't know, there's two realities going on. And it's like these people
yeah,
that feel like they can't adult at all, and they're in their mid 20s. Like, you've gone to college, you've done all these things. What is the disconnect here? It
right.
really just,
Yeah.
I highly recommend this book, just in the sense of it raises so many good questions to wrestle with yourself. This would be a good
Hmm.
book for book club. That would be a spicy
It
book
would
club.
be. It would be. I would definitely encourage, especially people with younger kids,
Mm-hmm.
to read this book. So I will share a funny story. One time when I was at the park, when obviously the evolution of my parenting has changed over the course of, the more kids you have, and you know the less capacity you have, right? So by the time I
Yes.
had my youngest, um, going to the park and her running around barefoot and climbing all the things I mean, I don't even think she was 2 yet, at the big park where all the big kids are going. I would have never done that with
Yeah.
Kate, with my oldest Katie. She was like bubble wrapped. Kevin and I were just like, you know, um,
Mm.
little hovering parents. But by the time Olivia came along, I mean, and really, honestly, Ryan too, probably. I remember being at the park one day, and she was little, And she was climbing like everything and jumping from the bridge to the, like,
Yeah.
whatever the little ring pole thing is. And
Yeah.
I had this mother that was like just getting on to me. And I was just like, and she was a first timer. So I was like, bless your heart. You'll get there one day,
Yeah.
maybe. But anyways, and it's just interesting to, I don't know, to see the different like parenting styles.
Yeah.
The more kids you have, and then the further you get in your parenting journey, the
Yeah.
you lighten up a little bit. And I can see the benefits in that. That's what I was going to say. I can see the benefits in that of just, even when they're little, releasing some of that control. Keep them safe. I'm not saying
Yes.
like,
Yeah.
use your brain, but this book would be really great for someone, with young kids, so that you can kind of, I wish I would have had this book back
Yeah.
then, because, you know, you're always being told like something is wrong with your kid, or that this or that or this other label or whatever. If they're not doing this by this certain age, then this must be wrong with them. And everybody's
Yeah.
different, you know? So,
Well, and I think she brings that up in the book and talks about too about how, when did we as parents feel like we are not equipped to
yeah,
like know if there is actually something wrong with our kids. And she does go into a kind of like dive of the public school system. So that might be the most political chapter. And kind of like how the school system is kind of trying to encourage teachers to take on this role of therapist in class, and but they have no training, they do not have a degree, they have not done clinical hours, they have not done any of these things that would qualify them to be a therapist,
right.
but yet they're constantly being encouraged to basically be a therapist for all of their students, and that is very
Hmm.
concerning. So
Yeah,
but then they come across as being like, well, I know what I'm talking about, and so parents go, oh,
I'm the
okay,
expert.
yes.
Yeah, yeah.
So there's that. But in this book, she brings up The Body Keeps the Score, which is a book that both of us have read, and I have
Hmm.
recommended that book to several people. And she brings up the fact that when this book came out, it was super popular, and the book talks about how your body holds on to trauma that you experience throughout your life, and that sometimes this can prevent you from almost like growth stunting, I guess. And so when something happens, you like trigger yourself to act a certain way because that's how your body adapted whenever it
Yeah,
first
yeah.
experienced the trauma. So I kind of felt called out when I was reading
Yeah,
that chapter, when she was going on and on and on about it. But it was a lot of points that I hadn't really considered. Um, and I will say, like, I think this is kind of a he said, she said argument to me, it seems like, because I do
I
think that
agree.
there is validity in what is in Body Keeps the Score. Um, but I also can see where maybe the term trauma is thrown around way too loosely in our society
Yeah,
today. So, like, trauma of you being punished by your parents, that's not trauma. That was discipline.
right,
Um, kind of thing. Yes, can that be? Yes, that can be. There's the caveat of, abuse. But
right,
I'm saying, I think a lot of times these kids are upset because, I got my phone taken away because I misbehaved, like something like
right.
that. And somehow that's turned into trauma. And so I think the word, and she might even say that in the book, the word trauma is used so much and doesn't even mean what it actually used to mean anymore. But I felt very called out when she was talking about that book. So,
Yeah. I think the same thing. I think it's kind of he said, she said. I see points in The Body Keeps the Score. I feel
mhm,
like that I can personally even be like, yeah, like that's what I've experienced. But I get where she's talking about, I don't know, like, did you just say this where it's like you're just, that book promotes like you're just kind of stuck in that space forever? But I didn't see that in that book. that's not how I picked up on, or that's not how I read that book. The Body Keeps the Score.
Yeah.
I don't know. I thought that book was a great tool of like understanding myself, understanding what was happening. And it helped for me, it helped make a lot of things make sense throughout my childhood. But I never felt like, oh, well, I'm just going to be like this forever. I'm just always going to struggle with this. Or I'm just, I'm just stuck here. I'm a victim. Like, that's not how I read it. I feel like that's how she kind of communicated in the book. And that's what I was talking about when I said there were things in this book that I didn't necessarily agree with. That's the spot, because we were talking and I couldn't remember the exact spot. But when you brought that book up, it reminded me. But yeah, so like I said, like you said, that it's a challenging book, and it doesn't mean, just, I want to say this too, like, just because we talk about a book doesn't mean, like, especially a self-help book, doesn't mean we agree with everything in it. I think, do we need to say that? Even in probably The Body Keeps the Score, we probably didn't agree with 100% of that either. So yeah, so just know that when we talk about some of these books, it's not because we're like, oh, putting our big fat stamp of approval on everything that's in there. But we both enjoy, you already said this, we both enjoy reading things that make us think a little bit. And then I was listening to something recently, and it was talking about, maybe it was you, maybe it was our podcast, where you were talking about not being in a vacuum, not reading books in a vacuum, but like books are meant to be discussed. Books are meant to be talked about. And so, yeah, that's my spiel.
I think that's the like point on The Body Keeps the Score that I would make as well, of that. And really, I think that could be said about any kind of book where you're talking about trauma or anything like that. If that book is not promoting you to get to a state where you feel like you are not in a victimhood state, I would question the validity of that theory or whatever you want to talk about. Because as humans, Christian or not, I would think we could all agree that we're all growing and on a journey. And to put yourself in this box of, this is just how I am, I had this stuff happen to me, this is how I react, and giving yourself a pass to never grow and change and get better and adapt. I think you could, like I said, use any tool and promote it in a way of like, well, I have this thing, so I don't have to try, basically, to get better. And I do agree that is probably something that people have used when they use that book. Well, I react that way because I had this trauma and almost getting a pass. That's not how I read it either. But I think that was the point that she was trying to make, is all these people then latched onto this idea and are like, oh, I'm now valid in why I respond to all of these things.
Yeah. And even you and I talked about it. It's kind of like the Enneagram.
I was totally thinking about that, but I didn't want to bring it
up. But like using the letters to like justify your behavior.
Numbers. Yes. Yeah.
You said numbers?
It's letters. No, it's numbers.
Oh, I thought it's letters.
It's 1 through 9.
It's numbers. You're right. I'm sorry. I'm thinking about Myers-Briggs.
But even that too.
To like justify, that too. To justify, well, I am just the XYZ, whatever. And like somehow that justifies. And you hear that all the time. Oh, well, I'm just 16. I'm not going to use the real numbers.
I was going to say, I'm a 9. And this is totally a side tangent, and maybe we should do a whole podcast on this. But we
will really be in hot water.
Didn't you read the book? Did you read the Enneagram book?
Books, Rachel. Okay, I was totally on that train.
Okay, yeah. So there's no judgment on that, is what I was trying to get at. I do think that anything that can be used. There's other reasons we're laughing about the Enneagram, which maybe we totally should do an episode on it, but
That would be a fun one, actually.
because we do have really opinions about it. But my point is, just like that, just like Enneagram, just like Myers-Briggs, just like anything, exactly what you said. If you are going to use anything as, I don't want to say a crutch, but as like a defining point for you and why you cannot change your bad habits or bad relationships or bad like how you communicate and stuff like that, that's
Your
not
sin
okay.
issues.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, that's not okay. And none of these books should make you feel like you're getting a pass for that at all. And I, again, think that that is a good reason why you should read Bad Therapy. I almost wish she had, I don't know what she could have called it, but like maybe to be more appealing to like a broad audience, because there are so many good points. Like you said, reading this as a young mom of how like I should be looking at things and evaluating things for my kids. As older, parents now, there's a wide array of very, very interesting points in this book that I think everybody should read. So,
yeah. I just got a book delivery on my doorstep.
Ooh, what is it?
Yay! Well, I'm not going to reveal on the podcast.
Oh, okay. But we did want to close out with a book that we do both like, and it's Boundaries. By Henry Cloud and John Townsend. I guess this is the newer one. It says when to say yes, when to say no, to take control of your life.
Like this.
Yeah, see, that's ancient. I've never even seen that cover.
That's pretty cool.
I had a lady one time recommend this book to me, and it is life-changing, I would say, in the sense of, this is not a book that says, oh, this is how you are. This is just how you are. This is a book that encourages you to set boundaries, but to put in place things that will help you have healthy relationships with people. Because I think that's a lot of where we struggle as a society, having healthy boundaries with people. And I think the more connected we are all the time, I'm 24/7 available to people, that's not good. And that's not how we were meant to live. And so I think we struggle with that as a culture and society. So it's kind of like in the same vein, but not really the Bad Therapy thing. But this is a good book that I would recommend reading as well, if you're looking for these types of books.
Yeah. I think this one, The Boundaries with Kids, would go great with Bad Therapy. Because they're healthy boundaries without being a helicopter parent. But also, I really love Dr. Henry Cloud, because that's where I got self-help books are an oxymoron. It's from him, and which is funny because all of his books are labeled self-help, but he really hates that.
Yeah. He actually has like a radio talk show thing that they put on YouTube.
It does.
And forever ago, we went down this.
Oh yeah.
Of like every day watching and people would get on there and we would like be texting or poloing like, oh my word, I can't believe that they said that or whatever. Like, that's a throwback to anyways, we did some weird stuff in 2020.
I think it was 2020 because he was like learning the whole live system. I don't know. I felt like I knew Dr. Henry Cloud. I felt like we were connected.
Yeah.
Back then. That was a fun time. There's
a lot of weird things that I look back now on 2020 and I'm like, that was really fun. And it would have never happened had it not been 2020.
Listen, he's got a boundaries book for everything.
Everything
and
needs
I have
a boundary.
Probably 5 of them.
Do you have good boundaries?
Boundaries with your pets. He's got boundaries with teens. I have boundaries with teens, boundaries in marriage, boundaries with kids, boundaries in dating. So I do have 5.
Oh,
Yeah.
we
So
should
I'm
have
a
done
huge
a whole
boundaries
podcast on
fan.
that. Yes.
I don't know. I haven't read all of them. But
Oh,
basically, if you just read this one, like
yeah.
you get the idea. So, or
Yeah.
the newer one. I
Yeah.
have both.
So you have
The
6.
old one and the new one, and all of the additions.
The spin-offs. Yeah. That's funny.
Oh my goodness.
But yeah, there's some really sound advice in there for different, like I said, there's let's look and see. It's boundaries with well, I guess it explains the different ones. This one has family, friends, spouse, children, work, yourself, and God. And boundaries, I think, still has kind of like a negative feeling term to it. Like when somebody says, well, I'm setting boundaries. But there's a lot of good stuff in here and very helpful things. And if I recall, because I've read it so long ago, if I recall, he talks about how like this was stuff that we used to naturally do, but as a society we
Yeah.
have really worn down people in boundaries and making people feel bad when they have boundaries, and then not teaching our kids boundaries, therefore they grow up and don't know how to have boundaries. Like it's just a cycle. Anyways, it's so there was a lot of stuff in here that I had never learned. I think this is a good one, but we're talking about going back to bad therapy and kind of closing it out. I think both of us would highly encourage people to read it. Is it gonna be the most funnest book that you ever read? No, because it's probably gonna be very convicting and challenging. But you should do it.
You should do it.
That might be my Goodreads review.
That's what we're
Do
prescribing. I think that's what I put. Everyone should read this book. I think that's what I wrote.
Sometimes there's just books that you just wish everybody would read so we could all get on the same page with stuff. This is one of them.
Can we all just get on my page?
All the books that I agree with. Let's all just get there. Thanks for listening and sticking with us through some bad therapy practices and opinions. But honestly, we encourage you to read it. And if you do read it, come back and leave us a comment and let us know, or if you've already read it. She is also making the rounds, like I said, on YouTube and stuff. So if you really can't commit to reading the book right now, you can go find Abigail Shrier, Bad Therapy. Yeah. It's everywhere. And she's doing a lot of interviews, which in the interviews, she talks a lot about what's in the book. So you could get a Cliff Notes, but we always recommend reading the book. So anyways, yes. So we'll hope to see you here next time. Bye.
Okay, bye. My stomach is growling, so
I can't hear it.
Okay, good. I was trying to cover for it.